So is this intense modern political fight over public education really a rerun of historical authoritarianism? Or is calling it fascist? Is that label itself part of the fight? That's the really high-stakes question we're jumping into today. We're looking closely at Randi Weingarten's book, Why Fascists Hate Teachers. And her main point, well, it cuts deep. She's basically saying these attacks on teachers, on the public school system, they're not really about fixing schools or getting better results. No, it's fundamentally about stopping critical thinking, independence, civic engagement, things that, inherently push back against centralized authoritarian power.
And you have to understand the timing, the context here. This book came out in 2025, right in the middle of these escalating right-wing attacks on educators, huge policy changes at the state level.
A real culture war footing.
Absolutely. Fought right through the curriculum. So the book feels urgent. It's meant to sound an alarm, to mobilize people.
Okay, so to really weigh these big claims, we have a specific approach. We believe some books really need to be challenged, examined closely. So this critique, it uses a step-by-step critical thinking framework where appropriate. Think mapping claims to evidence, sort of like the methods from Richard Paul and Linda Elder.
And we also bring in an intellectual framework, drawing on ideas from Mortimer J. Adler. Plus, we use tools like the Golden Rule and even the U.S. Preamble to look for ethical imbalances, ethical asymmetries.
Right. And only after all that do we try to pull together a logical analysis and hopefully a balanced conclusion.
And just so you know, what you're experiencing here is a unique kind of two-host AI conversation. It's powered by Google's NotebookLM, and the idea is to give you a deeper, more dynamic critique than, say, just a summary.
All right, let's dig into the foundation. The book makes three big connected claims. First, teachers are targeted not because they're failing, but actually because they're succeeding. Succeeding at fostering critical thinking, empathy, basic civic virtues.
The second claim zooms out historically. Weingarten argues that, look, authoritarian regimes, serious ones seeking total control, they always go after the curriculum. They ban books. They target independent teachers first.
Why? What's the core reason?
Because independent thought is the #1 enemy of centralized total power. Simple as that, from that perspective.
Okay. And the third claim connects that history to right now. These current political moves, defunding public schools, pushing privatization with vouchers, restricting what can be taught. The book argues these aren't just policy disagreements.
No, it frames them as direct echoes, the same playbook as those historical authoritarian regimes.
That's a huge claim. What evidence does she use?
Well, it leans heavily on historical case studies, and honestly, this is probably where the book is strongest. It mixes current policy analysis with some powerful historical examples, like the really specific, well-documented story of Norwegian teachers resisting the Nazis back in World War II.
That one really stands out. Tell us a bit more about that, the Norwegian teachers. How does that support the thesis?
Well, it's a moment where teachers basically became a collective roadblock to totalitarian control. The Nazi-backed government in Norway tried to force fascist ideology into the classrooms.
Right.
And the Norwegian Teachers Front, which was like almost all the educators, they just refused. Flat out refused to comply. They faced arrests, deportation to concentration camps. But their unified nonviolent resistance essentially made it impossible for the regime to indoctrinate the kids effectively.
Wow.
They showed that organized teachers committed to objective truth are just fundamentally incompatible with regimes built on pure ideological control.
So the evidence base, drawing these lines between book bans, controlling teaching, defunding, it supports the idea that a free education system just can't coexist with authoritarianism. And the historical facts, they are documented.
That's definitely a strength. But this is where the critique, using that intellectual framework we mentioned, finds a key issue. It's the book's constant use of the word fascist.
Ah, the labeling issue.
Exactly. The argument often seems to conflate actions that are typical of authoritarianism in general, like centralizing curriculum control, with actions that are specifically and historically fascist.
Okay, hold on, though. Is that distinction maybe a bit?
Yeah.
Academic. I mean, if the political goal is control, suppressing diverse thought, does it really matter if we call it authoritarian versus the stronger term, fascist? For a lot of people, fascist signals, an existential threat.
And that's the trade-off, isn't it? From a strictly analytical viewpoint, the critique argues this blurring reduces precision. By using the most extreme label so broadly, the book might actually push away moderate critics, people who might agree we need to support public schools, but strongly disagree with being labeled as supporting fascism just for, say, exploring privatization ideas.
So risks shutting down conversation.
Potentially, yes. It can close off needed dialogue about real policy differences that aren't necessarily rooted in fascist ideology.
That distinction feels really important if the goal is rational, productive debate, which is exactly what we're trying to do here, exploring these connections, these tensions in real time. Much like the analysis you can find over on the Mindful Moments YouTube channel. Our channel, by the way, offers AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, and other content really aimed at sparking reflection and rational thought.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the moral side of things. The critique uses a golden rule assessment, and this really throws the ethical stakes into sharp relief. The book argues, quite powerfully, that attacking teachers and defunding public schools hurts the most vulnerable kids, students who depend on these schools as their main, sometimes only, path to opportunity.
And the ethical asymmetry there. It seems pretty stark, doesn't it?
It really is. Imagine if the critics of current education policy, who often have access to private schools or other high-quality options, imagine they switched places with those students relying entirely on the public system. The Golden Rule strongly suggests that policies designed to weaken those public schools would suddenly seem completely unacceptable.
Right. You wouldn't do that to yourself or your own kids.
Precisely. The philosophical wisdom argument here is strong. Education is fundamentally about fair opportunity, about equity.
And yet,
Yeah.
we did notice something in the rhetoric. While the book champions teachers as sort of guardians of democracy, which shows real philosophical commitment, the critique points out that sometimes there's, well, ad hominem attacks, and maybe some significant rhetorical overreach aimed at political opponents.
It's weakness number 9 identified in the critique.
Ah, okay. And that kind of passionate advocacy, it can sometimes dilute the logical rigor, can't it? It's tough to stay purely logical when you're fighting for something you believe in so strongly.
It's a definite tension. Now, connecting this to the absolute biggest picture, the critique looked at the book's claims through the lens of the U.S. Preamble, using it as a kind of moral and structural guide for the nation. And this really shows how central the book positions public education to American democracy itself.
Okay, let's break down those preamble links. This is where the stakes for the whole country are laid out. How does the book argue that undermining schools actually sabotages the goals in that founding document?
All right, start with form a more perfect union. The book warns that the current polarization is tearing the country apart. Public education, it argues, is supposed to be this vital, unifying force.
Creating shared understanding.
Exactly. Shared civic identity, common values needed for stability. So if you undermine the schools, you risk fracturing the union into these isolated, hostile ideological camps.
Okay, makes sense. What about established justice?
The connection there is opportunity. Justice means a fair shot for everyone, right? Regardless of where you start. The book argues that weakening public schools directly erodes that fair opportunity. It turns education from a right into a privilege, which is fundamentally unjust.
That seems to lead right into ensure domestic tranquility. It feels like a strong claim, though, linking school funding battles to civil unrest.
Well, the suggestion is that constant attacks on schools, the defunding, it breeds instability, not peace. When communities feel their core institutions, like schools, are under siege, it fuels anger, distrust. The long-term result could be a less educated, more volatile population, directly undermining tranquility.
Interesting. And provide for the common defense. We usually think military, but the book takes a broader view.
A much broader view. It sees education as absolutely crucial for protecting liberty and security. The argument is that the best defense for a free nation isn't just weapons, it's informed citizens. People capable of critical thought, who can tell fact from propaganda.
If people can't think critically,
Then the nation is vulnerable. Vulnerable to internal manipulation, external threats, regardless of military might. Education is common defense in that sense.
okay. Then promote the general welfare. How does that fit?
This focuses on public resources. The book really protests diverting public money away from public schools, which serve the majority, towards things like private school vouchers. This reallocation, it argues, starves the public good to benefit private interests, ultimately harming the community's general welfare.
And finally, the big one, secure the blessings of liberty. That seems like the most direct link.
It really is the capstone. The book frames freedom of thought and the freedom to teach without state control as the absolute core of liberty itself. Once the government dictates what you can think, what can be taught, liberty is essentially gone. So defending teachers is defending liberty.
That's a powerful conceptual framework. Those connections between democratic health and public education are argued really strongly. Shows a lot of philosophical depth, even if, as we noted, some of the rhetoric might overstate the direct causal link between every current policy and historical fascism.
Right. And ultimately, the core wisdom takeaway from the critique is this long-run social necessity. Education isn't optional. It's not a luxury. It's fundamental for democracy to even function, for inclusion, for the common good. That argument is probably the book's most lasting contribution.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. The big strengths identified. It's a passionate, vigorous defense of teachers as, well, pillars of democracy. It pulls together history and current events with real emotional force, and it makes the stakes for education in a free society crystal clear.
But the weaknesses are important too, especially for constructive debate. That blurring between general authoritarian tendencies and specific historical fascism weakness number 3, again, it does hurt analytical precision. And that rhetorical style, while powerful, risks alienating potential allies. It might make productive conversation harder with people who support certain reforms, like privatization, for reasons they genuinely don't see as fascist.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with some really critical open questions. How do we best defend public schools in these incredibly polarized times? Can it be done without using language that just shuts down any hope of dialogue?
And maybe the biggest question, does labeling all education reform efforts you disagree with as fascist actually strengthen democratic discourse by sounding the alarm? Or does it ultimately weaken it by creating more antagonism, making any mutual understanding impossible? That's unresolved is something for you to really think about.
If you're looking to explore these ideas further to get more perspectives, what should people look at?
Well, for balancing perspectives, the critique suggested looking into books like Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present for historical context on authoritarianism. Also, the works of Mortimer Adler himself on pursuing truth and understanding, and crucially, seeking out counterarguments from diverse ideological viewpoints to really foster genuine debate. And we should add, this critique we've been discussing applies a systematic, very precise framework. The goal was to evaluate the book with intellectual rigor, ethical clarity, and importantly, epistemic humility, acknowledging what we can and can't know for sure.
What really stands out, I think, is that connection the critique makes between the freedom to teach academic freedom and the survival of liberty itself. It makes you consider just how essential critical thinking truly is to the common defense, in that broader sense, of any free nation. If you want to dive deeper into this book, click the link on screen for the full in-depth book analysis. Please subscribe, share, maybe purchase the book via the link if you're interested, and above all, think rationally.